Let's start with a big question. What if George Washington was gay, black, autistic, or disabled? Now, his rise to power seems kind of inevitable, right? But the truth is, it really depended on his privileges, race, class, and ability. So what happens if you take those away? Would American history have changed at all?
You see, Washington's path was paved by the fact that he was a wealthy, white, able-bodied man. So in this explainer, we're going to explore 4 what-ifs, 4 totally different Washingtons, just to see what happens when you replace those privileges with difference. Could he still have become the father of a nation? Let's find out.
All right, first up, let's imagine a gay George Washington, a man forced to navigate a world where his very identity could get him killed. Now look, this isn't just coming out of nowhere. The idea is actually grounded in the historical record. Washington's relationships with men like Alexander Hamilton were incredibly intense, really emotionally charged. History has always just called it friendship, but we're just asking the question, what if it was more?
Well, surviving as a gay man back in the 18th century wasn't really about who you loved. It was all about discretion. You had these secret social networks, molly houses. And yeah, while the law was absolutely brutal, prosecutions were actually pretty rare. You needed witnesses. Plus, a strategic marriage to a rich widow like Martha Custis, which, let's not forget, he did anyway for financial reasons, would have been the perfect social cover.
So in that kind of world, a gay Washington could have actually thrived. I mean, think about it. The military's intense male bonding culture, that's natural cover. The era's acceptance of so-called romantic friendships allowed men to be openly devoted to each other without raising suspicion. And his talent for building intense loyalty with powerful men, that was basically the engine of Virginia's entire political system. And here is the twist. The very skills he would have needed to survive as a closeted gay man back then, constantly reading social cues, maintaining a perfect public image, exercising just extreme emotional control, those are the exact same political talents that we celebrate Washington for. His famous reserve, maybe it wasn't stoicism, maybe it was a survival mechanism.
Okay, let's raise the stakes. We're moving from a hidden identity to one that was visibly and systematically oppressed. What if George Washington was black?
We have to start right here, with this number, 317. Washington built his entire world on the labor of enslaved people. So let's flip that. What if he was one of the 60,000 free black people living in colonial America? The road would have been incredibly hard, for sure, but not impossible. You had free black communities in cities like Philadelphia and Boston. You had these parallel power structures popping up, like the Masonic lodges founded by Prince Hall. And, most importantly, you had Lord Dunmore's proclamation, which offered freedom to any enslaved person who took up arms for the British. And when you look at the timeline, it all just clicks. Just 15 years after the American Revolution ended, an enslaved man in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, led the only successful slave revolution in human history. The raw material, the potential for a black revolutionary general, it was absolutely right there at that exact time. And this leads to a really profound thought. A black Washington, a man with that kind of strategic genius, might have looked at the American cause and seen nothing but hypocrisy. He could have sided with the British. He might have even led his own liberation movement. He might not have become the father of America, but the founder of a free black republic, a whole generation before Haiti. All right, let's shift gears. We're going to move from social identity to his inner world. What if the general's famous reserve wasn't just his personality? What if it was a fundamentally different way of thinking? Seriously, think about that. For 4 whole months, during one of the most important political debates in world history, the man in charge was almost completely silent. The people around him found him distant, rigid. Was it just dignity, or was it something else? Well, if you look at the records, you see a pattern. Washington was extremely uncomfortable in social settings. He had this obsessive focus on very narrow subjects, like farming and military logistics. His public persona was flat, super controlled. And remember, before he was a general, he was a land surveyor, a job that's all about systematic thinking and solitary focus. A lot of these traits map really closely to what we now understand as the autism spectrum.
And what's so fascinating is how people saw these traits back then. In the 18th century, there was no diagnosis for autism. So his social rigidity, they saw it as dignity. His difficulty with small talk was seen as aristocratic reserve, or gravitas. And his hyper-focused, systematic mind was seen as the mark of a truly disciplined commander. And this totally reframes Washington's most celebrated moment when he voluntarily gave up power, even though a lot of people wanted to make him king.
Maybe it wasn't just Republican virtue. Maybe it was the product of a mind that cared way more about systems, rules, and order than personal ambition. He didn't want a throne, he wanted a constitution. The American Republic may have actually been saved by neurodivergence.
Okay, for our last scenario, let's look at the man himself, his physical body, which everyone saw as one of his greatest strengths. But what if it had been his biggest obstacle?
Washington was a giant for his time. 6'2", a powerful presence, an amazing horseman, his body was basically a political tool, a piece of propaganda. But the reality? He was sick all the time. He survived smallpox, malaria, dysentery, tuberculosis. He'd lost most of his teeth by his 40s. The guy was far from invincible.
But here's the thing. Physical disability wasn't a total deal-breaker for power back then. Washington's contemporary, the British Admiral Nelson, became their greatest national hero after losing an arm and an eye. And Ben Franklin, he was 81, and they literally carried him into the Constitutional Convention in a chair. Washington's true genius was always in his mind. It was strategic, not physical.
And that leads to our final twist. Without his impressive body to use as a brand, a disabled Washington would have been forced to build his authority on one thing and one thing only: his intellect and his record. He would have had to invent a more modern, more purely democratic kind of leadership, one that didn't depend on the performance of physical strength.
So there you have it, 4 different Washingtons, 4 different paths through American history. So what does it all mean? What does it tell us? Well, here's the paradox. In every single one of these scenarios, the very systems that were designed to suppress these alternate identities, they also created the exact skills that made Washington a legendary leader. The need for discretion, the creation of underground networks, the development of intense focus, the reliance on pure intellect, it's all there.
So you see, the question isn't really whether these other Washingtons could have existed. The paths were there. They were harder, steeper, and a whole lot more dangerous, for sure, but they existed. The real question is something else.
The real question is why. Why our telling of history, why our construction of heroes, created a story where only one version of him seemed possible. Why a system of power made absolutely sure we never got to find out what those other Washingtons could have become.